There are about 70% of the population now that's either overweight or obese, and that includes both men, women, even children. And I'm wondering, why is it that women seem to care so much more when they carry excess body weight?
Well, I'm glad you asked because it's a really interesting evolutionary uh, reason for that. You know, our close cousins with whom we share 98.8% of our genes do not care how they look. We know this because every female mates with every other male in the troop to ensure that her baby will not be killed by any males. And so she doesn't care how she looks because she's going to mate with everybody. And he's not going to do anything to help her raise that baby because she never lets anybody touch that baby. No other females, no one touches that baby but her. And that's because infanticide is a big problem for them. However, humans, the lineage that led to humans took a different path. About 7 million years ago, there was a period of cooling, and the lineage that ultimately led to us began searching for food on the savanna. And there it was useful to be able to stand upright more often. And they eventually, the first change really was upright posture. They eventually were walking upright and had all these adaptations to walk upright all the time. And that caused this change in the birth canal that made it much more difficult to give birth to babies at full term. And so babies were selected to be born much earlier in development. They're really premature compared to chimpanzee babies. If you see a chimpanzee baby, it can do way more than a human baby can. And as a result, those fathers who helped provide for their child had more surviving offspring. And so providing for your baby, actually falling in love and forming a pair bond, evolved in the lineage that led to humans very, very early in evolution, way back, 4, 5, 6 million years ago. People, I shouldn't say people, but hominids were already forming pair bonds. That led to the fact that fathers were real important in whether or not your baby would survive. And so it was important to get a good dad. So females began to compete with each other to win the best fathers for their children. And now this is obviously this competition today. Because they don't care about competing, our apes cousins don't even think about how they feed. I mean, how they look. So the need to store fat happened later as the subtropical forests were diminishing, and people were, I should say, hominids were venturing further and further from the subtropical forests. They had a need when they went into temperate regions with long winters to be able to store fat. Now, that's always a need that animals have, but usually they can't really get away with that because of the need to run from predators. Think about the animals that do store a ton of fat for migration or for hibernation. Pardon me, I was searching for that word. For hibernation, like bears, nobody's going to mess with a bear, so they can get away with it. But other animals tend not to be able to store fat. Well, what changed for people are our ancestors. By now, we are humans when we spread out across the earth. This was in the last 60,000 years, and Homo sapiens have been around for 200,000 years. So we were fully modern humans when we spread around the earth, and when fat storage really started to take off. But before this, the thing that allowed this was that people became more and more social and lived in groups where they took care of each other's defense. And that ability to store fat enabled them to survive in the Arctic, in deserts, and the ability to control fire, which hominids have had for about maybe 2 million years. There's evidence of using fire. Predators don't like fire. So that combination of having of fire, and people would keep a campfire going. Let's see, I guess I don't have that right now. They would keep that campfire going all through the night. Some people would trade off, and that kept them free of predators. And the fact that they had weapons by now and that they worked together meant that they could get away with storing fat, which was a big advantage for making it through. I mean, think about here are people around a campfire. Think about it, making it through a long Central European or Northern European winter. And it's not just natural selection, but also something called sexual selection. Darwin thought sexual selection was pretty important. And we now know it's really important for animals that pair bond. You know, so you think about a peacock's tail. It's so extravagant, so beautiful. And that's not from natural selection. It's from the mates acting like breeders. You know, if you breed for a certain kind of dog, you can really get some extreme things, or a certain kind of cow, or a certain kind of any species. And sexual selection is like breeding, like artificial selection or mating, you know, choosing who gets to mate. So that works even faster than natural selection. Sometimes it's very powerful. If the best, the ones that mates look, if the traits that mates look for are selected, that can move the population means of a trait very quickly, more quickly sometimes than natural selection. And what we see if we look at caves from Central Europe is that it looks like fat brides were a premium, were desired, that the ability to store fat, if you look, I don't know if you can see this on your slides, but this one is from 35,000 years ago, or BCE, so that's 37,000 years ago. In Germany, the first one. The second one is from Austria, 30,000, Czech Republic, 28,000, France, 26,000 years ago, or BCE, and so on. These are very common, these female figurines. They call them Venus figurines. The most famous one is the one in the center, the Venus of Willendorf. And they're clearly, you know, the Venus of Willendorf, for example, has braided hair. She looks like she's a kind of you know, idealized female. So both natural selection and sexual selection could be why there are many of us in our population who are on the right side of the weight distribution for genetic reasons. In fact, that's the only reason you're on the right side of the weight distribution, pretty much, because it's actually as hard to gain weight over your set point or your genetic point as to keep it permanently below. There's a weight is as heritable as height. So Homo sapiens, as I said, we used to live as egalitarian hunter-gatherers. And there's a lot of evidence for this. And men and women were freely able to choose their mates based on their character, intelligence, and their looks. Then we had the rise of state societies and kind of an end of this feminist Eden, because males began to control, elite males, the resources that females needed to raise their children. And so females now had to compete on arbitrary appearance standards. So I said that males and females both choose, and they choose based on various traits. And appearance is one of the things, because appearance, a male would want an attractive female because that would indicate that she would be a good, healthy mother for his children. And so females started to care a lot about, or evolved to care a lot about how they looked. So as we know, these oppressive appearance standards were kind of horrific at times there. And even today, there's female genital mutilation. Foot binding, I cannot imagine being the mom. The moms had to break their little daughter's feet and twist them under when they were 4 or 5. I cannot imagine, but she didn't have a chance of marrying unless this was done. So what's the foot binding of today's women? Well, we have now an oppressive weight standard. In 1960, Marilyn Monroe was normal weight. Models were pretty much normal weight. They were a little bit thinner than average women their age, only 6% thinner. Interestingly enough, very few people dieted. Eating disorders were more rare. Then, and I think this is not an accident, at the very same time that females finally had access to reliable birth control in the late 1960s, so that their aspirations and attainment in school and in careers could not be interrupted by unexpected pregnancy. That is the very time when we had a decline in the ideal weight of females. And that declined to 15% below those of other women their age. There are only 5% of women who are naturally as tall and thin as models. And you can't change we agree that you can't change your height. And so people try to change their weight. In the last year, half of Americans dieted. And as you pointed out, we've become much more obese over the last 70 years. Americans now, the average man and woman weighs 30 pounds more than they did in 1950. Both the men and women. Why is that? Because dieting leads to increased weight gain. And the reason it does that, it doesn't for everyone. You know, there are definitely people on the left side of the bell-shaped curve, you know, this would be thin, this would be fat, who can't gain a pound to save their life. We all know people like this, I think. And, but there's the people in the middle, or definitely on the right, have a lot of genes that are very sensitive to environmental cues of famine. And what happens for them is that if they go on an extreme weight loss diet, it will push up their weight set point, because our genes can be tweaked, can be modified, can be tuned to the environment we live in. And an extreme weight loss diet will cause the genes to be more efficient. And at storing fat, it'll push up the set point, the weight, ideal weight or amount of fat that your body wants to store. And so obesity rates have risen to 34%. They used to be lower than 25%. So that's kind of horrifying. And so have, eating disorders have increased. This is because we teach people that this is under your control. And as it happens, it's not. What is under your control, and what the other people, some of the other speakers have been talking about a lot, is that we have a choice to eat food that makes us gain a lot more weight, or to eat foods that our ancestors evolved with, which will help us be at the weight that our genes intended us to be. So it's really important to eat a whole food diet, and to avoid foods that are processed, that are really, there are no naturally occurring sweet fats. There are not in nature. The closest thing might be breast milk. And if you've ever tasted breast milk, it's really thin for humans. It doesn't taste fatty at all. It's just this sort of weakly, it's sweetish and it's watery. And that's the closest thing we've got to a sweet fat in nature. We're wired to care about sweets, and we learn very quickly to care about fats. Our bodies are designed to very quickly learn the nutritional consequences of all the foods we encounter. And so what processors have done is put together sweet and fat so that we have a super normal releaser for eating. And, so pastries, white carbs are not things that we evolved with, and not things that we regulate very well around. But since weight is as heritable as height, we don't go through life fighting our height, and we shouldn't go through life fighting our weight. We should love the body God gave us. However, because we are taught that we should control our appetite for food, eating has become really perverted in in a lot of the for a lot of us. It's hard. We need to get back to that Eden of not trying to control our weight, but trying to eat a whole food diet. So here this woman is saying, "Whew, at last I can eat." Whereas in the Victorian era, presumably she might have been thinking, or they might have been thinking, at last we can have sex. So why do females care? Why do we try to meet these impossible standards? Why did those mothers, bind their babies' feet, their little girls' feet? And why do mothers today participate in their child's genital mutilation? Why do even little kids start to care about how they look? Well, little girls. It turns out that they're taught to care because everybody around them cares, but it really gets turned up at puberty. Ovarian hormones actually turn up your self-consciousness. And those of you who've had daughters have probably seen this, or maybe you remember it for yourself. You were just kind of carefree and happy at 8 or 9 or 10, and then suddenly your body starts to change. You get your period, and you are in there, fussing about your appearance. So why would females be wired to care? Because we're pair bond. Because all animals that pair bond, I suppose, worry about how they look, although maybe they're not as self-conscious as humans are, presumably not. But no, you have to compete for the best mates. So what's a girl to do? We have impossible standards for many of us to meet. And if you try to meet them, you can make it worse. Well, I have some good news. I really am excited about this. It turns out that some evolutionary psychologists did these large studies of cultures, 37 different cultures around the world. And they asked people to choose from a list of about 20 traits. What's the most important thing you're looking for in a mate? And they expected that they would see males saying attractiveness and females saying money. But that's not what happened. Everybody all over the world had the same, chose the same top two things. And it wasn't attractiveness and it wasn't money. It was goodness. Goodness is number one. All over the world, and think about it. What good is a handsome or beautiful mate if they're a horrible person? Goodness, being a good human being, being a good person was the most important. Kind and understanding was actually the trait that they said. I want someone who's kind and understanding. And next was intelligence. So what's exciting about this is, unlike our genetic set point for weight, which we can only make worse, we can't seem to make better, we can become more kind and understanding. We can work on being a better listener, a better friend, a kinder person, more understanding. And we can work on intelligence. We can work on reading more, paying attention, learning things. We can work on being more intelligent. We can make a big difference in those two things. And with that, and we don't get sick. So I think in our evolution, the remarkable thing about humans is that we are more, you might not believe this, but it's really true. We're certainly capable of genocide and so on, but that is explained by a different kind of selection. As individuals in our group, we are way kinder, more generous, more helpful than any of our cousins, way more. And we're way more hypersocial. In fact, we cooperate, we specialize. So there are we needed specialization to birth babies, to have midwives, doctors, teachers, because we teach our babies. They don't, chimpanzees and bonobos don't teach their babies. They don't even teach them how to forage. We teach them all kinds of things. We're pretty amazing. And we're amazing in how good we are, really. As I say, that's not necessarily true between groups, but within groups. So I think that's due to that sexual selection. Okay, if you find this intriguing, my husband and I and a colleague have edited this book on chaos theory and nonlinear psychology, where we talk about how chaos theory, which is the idea that patterns spontaneously form in nature and that you can capture that patterning to develop more complex systems, and that's essential for understanding how thought works, for example, or how evolution worked. And these ideas I've just been talking about, I talk about in a couple of chapters in this book on chaos theory and nonlinear psychology.
That was really, really quite fascinating.
Thank you. Thank you.
I kept to wonder, are human beings really the only ones that care about their appearance? Because sometimes when I see animals in nature, they seem proud too of their appearance, the way they groom and like I think about the male peacock with his feathers.
Oh, they're very proud, I think. Yeah, I think they're very proud. All the animals that pair bond probably have to be concerned about how they're looking.
That's so interesting. Yeah. You said that the extreme weight loss can cause the genes to be more efficient at storing fat. Is it still possible, though, for people that wish to lose weight to do it in a manner where that won't happen?
It depends on what their set point is, right? So if, that 30 pounds of extra weight that the average American is carrying, that's over their genetic set point, right? So if they never go on an extreme weight loss diet and they eat a whole food diet, an awful lot of those people could float down. It'll take some time for their genes to reset themselves to the fact that they're now living without famine, but they will. And so a lot of people will, in fact, lose if they give up, the high calorically dense, supernormal releasing foods that we didn't evolve with.
You completely mirrored what one of the other experts on the summit, Dr. Doug Lyle, said about how we were never intended to have sugar and fat in the same bite of food.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah.
And that's basically what dessert is.
Yeah, it is. That's right. That's why you have it at the end of the meal when you're actually full, but this will allow you to eat one more thing because it has that combination.
That is so interesting. So, I have this idea that there's a lowest attainable weight for people, but also a lowest sustainable weight. And I think part of the problem is women seem to want to be thinner than what their genetics would have them be in a natural setting.
Right. And they didn't used to, women were not, nobody was dieting. In fact, I tried to find how many people were dieting in 1960. I couldn't find it. If any of your listeners can find it, I'd be so thrilled. Because it was so rare, you couldn't find it. Children didn't diet, or certainly kids with extreme obesity would have been put on diets, but otherwise children weren't dieting. They weren't caring about this. Nobody cared about it when Marilyn Monroe was our ideal. But once the ideal was someone who was thinner than 95% of us, people started trying to attain that. And that I believe is really part of the oppression of women that came after women got freed to compete with men more effectively in academics and in professions.
And it seems that the beauty standard in other cultures isn't this Twiggy ideal. That I'm not sure Twiggy is even the ideal anymore, but it seems like other cultures seem to like a little bit more meat on their bones.
What cultures were you thinking about?
Well, just cultures like, for example, that maybe really did have famine, that really, maybe did have like they looked at that as wealth, that having excess weight was wealth.
Right. Yeah. In the past. Yeah, certainly in, say, India, for example, it was important to have, it was a sign of status to have some ability to store fat. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That is really interesting. I know that you're an expert in the treatment of anorexia nervosa. So is that always a case of just dieting gone too far? Could somebody become anorexic if they had never attempted to go on a diet in their life?
Right. A lot of people who develop anorexia when they're young teens. So there are two modal periods for developing anorexia, 12 to 14 and 18 to 20. In the 12 to 14 year group, a lot of them aren't trying to lose weight. They just shot up in height and they're twigs, they're twiggy, like Twiggy, or they're bean poles, or they're these kids that are just completely healthy, but super thin because they haven't started to fill out yet. And at that time, if they get real busy in running or ballet or something that pushes them a little too hard and they lose some weight or they get sick, then they can develop anorexia, because anorexia is caused by a critical fall in leptin, which is the hormone that is produced by fat cells and that tells the hypothalamus how much fat you have stored. And if you store, if your fat stores drop low enough, and you have anorexia genes and you have estrogen, so it's the ability to develop anorexia is turned on by estrogen and by weight loss. So that's why 90% of people who develop anorexia are female, because males can carry the genes, and some males do develop it. They tend to be people who are really hyper conscientious and hard driving and high achieving, because people who develop anorexia are they're naturally thin and active. They're highly conscientious. They're almost always doing really well in school or work. And in the Pleistocene, these would have been the ones that the tribe could have sent, these people with high self-control. The tribe could have sent them to look for better lands for the tribe. And so normally when a tribe was starving, if one person is starving, everyone's starving in a tribe, because I said they're egalitarian, they shared food. So there wouldn't have been a rich hunter-gatherer and a poor hunter-gatherer. There were always, if they were starving together. And there it would be important to, try to wait out that famine. Most of us will just hunker down and look, focus on nothing but finding what food we can in the environment there. But some people naturally are not very food motivated and have high energy. And those people could have been selected over many, many migrations when people were moving out of Africa. If they were on the leading edge of a population that was finding new virgin lands with prey that were naive to group hunters with weapons, then their genes would expand when the population expanded. They would be increasing in frequency, these genes. And I think that's why we have a fair amount of anorexia nervosa represented in our gene pool among Asians and Europeans and Native Americans today. That there's a fair number of people who can develop anorexia. And so after Twiggy, of course, rates of anorexia doubled, because now you were having it not so much in that young modal group, but in the 18 to 20-year-olds who go off to college, gain the freshman 15, and then go on a diet and then find that they're really good at it. They go on a diet and they just keep going. And those are the people who often get caught in anorexia in that age group.
Wow.
And the cure, pardon me.
Do you see them come out of it? Because I don't know if this is most of the people you see, but a lot of the women that I've talked to had anorexia maybe in their teens or 20s. And then eventually it went the other way, where they weren't really overweight or obese before. Eventually they couldn't diet anymore, and they often gained a lot of weight or became bulimic.
So what the studies tell us now of large populations is that an awful lot of people, an awful lot of girls and women get anorexia once and recover and are completely, fine for the rest of their lives. No problems with bulimia, with anorexia again. Most people, three-fourths, recover spontaneously without even getting any treatment. Which you'd expect of something. I mean, that's what it was supposed to happen. But then there's that quarter who don't, and they don't in part because people get complimented on their looks when they're losing weight. They come, they're living in this culture that idealizes low levels. The thing about anorexia is it gives you this feeling that you're doing something really important and special. So that there are a lot of reasons why it might stick with some people. And if it sticks for a while, if you can't eat your way out of it and gain that weight back that you need to recover, you will develop bulimia. I think almost everyone does probably develops bulimia, because the normal adaptations to starvation are to binge eat. And then when people binge eat and they've got a tiny little stomach, it feels terrible, and they feel physically bad. If they get rid of it, they feel a lot better. And so that quickly becomes very addictive, because we've involved the dopamine reward system. And so that can really get entrenched, and people can have problems with bulimia for decades. So it's really important to help people know that binge eating towards the end of recovery from anorexia is actually a positive thing. It means you're almost there. It means that the anorexic adaptations are starting to fall away. And what you're now experiencing are the normal adaptations to starvation that thwart dieters, which are that you have overwhelming hunger. And, our eating choices are mostly made by the brainstem, by the hypothalamus. And we take credit for that because the conscious mind takes credit for everything the non-conscious mind does. But 95% of our brain activity is non-conscious. And you can't really, nobody can really stand up against hunger. It'll just take over, put you in a trance, turn down all your systems of self-restraint. So what you can do is you can choose to eat a diet that is like the one our ancestors evolved with, that's whole foods, unprocessed foods. That kind of decision you can make, but other kinds of decisions, like to not eat when you're ravenously hungry, you can't make. Your body just takes over. Sorry, let you.
Yeah, well, no, that makes sense because, I know that intermittent fasting is the rage and some people are recommending that for weight loss, but Dr. Lyle is one of them who isn't, says, no, you are meant to eat when you're hungry, but you're also meant to eat the right foods, the ones that our ancestors ate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You mentioned that 90% of people who suffer with anorexia are female. And I'm curious, with bulimia, is it also mostly female, or is that an equal opportunity destroyer?
Good question. Yeah, bulimia is much more more equal. Yeah. I don't know the percentages, but it is that extreme. Yeah.
I remember once going to an art museum, I think it might have been the Getty, and seeing paintings by Rubens, and they had these, nude women that were voluptuous. Maybe you would say excess body fat. I don't want to body shame, but they were definitely not twiggy. And that was considered the standard. But according to many people, excess body fat is unattractive. When did that become a thing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think really depended on the ecology or the times, as you pointed out, just in this century, there are still cultures that idealized having some excess fat. So it really depends on whether or not that was something that indicated or gave you some protection from a famine every now and then.
Yeah. Okay. I understand from your presentation that when we started pair bonding, if a woman they had to compete with attractiveness, but it seems that everybody that I know that's female, whether they're in their 80s or, a 4-year-old in these beauty pageants, it seems like women really care about their appearance.
Yeah. I wonder how much of that is our media soaked culture? It's kind of hard to have women compete on goodness, right? And it's kind of hard to have women compete on intelligence. Maybe, you do all the way through school, but, that doesn't make good television probably for the most part. Whereas looks are something that makes good television.
And in social media, think about Instagram, it just ends up, I think, making people feel bad about themselves.
Well, it seems to, yeah, it seems to be really pernicious.
I was thinking maybe instead of just going on a diet of whole foods, having people go on a diet off social media.
I agree completely. Yeah. Yeah, I do. I think there's a lot of toxic media out there that people shouldn't have in their homes, beauty magazines and and watching makeovers or watching things that emphasize appearance.
Yeah.
If you feel bad after, don't do it.
Why is it, I don't know if you know the answer to this, but I've seen this because I've worked with a lot of people over the last 10 years, helping them get to a leaner body weight and reverse many of the chronic lifestyle diseases. But it almost seems that women become cruel to them when they lose weight. They're not happy for them. They often are quite mean to their friends and family members that have escaped this dietary pleasure trap. Do you know why that is?
Yes. Well, I think, as you said, if you're competing with this person and she's succeeding at something that you're failing at, you know, it's human nature to hate her. And you asked about why do we hate, why is there such an anti-fat stigma now? And I think it's also that all those, what percent of people, if 50% of people are dieting this year, and over their lifetime, something like 80% have, and most have gained some of that back. And I think that when people didn't diet, people didn't hate fat as much as they do now, that they hate fat and are much more critical of fat and disdainful of fat because they've gained weight back. They hate themselves, and it's their own self-loathing that they project onto people who are fatter than them. They say, well, maybe I couldn't keep that 40 pounds off, but at least I didn't gain, as much as she did, that kind of thing. And I think that unconscious projection of our own disappointment in ourselves gets projected onto people who are fatter, because anti-fat bias is really toxic.
You know what I wanted to ask you, since you look at things from an evolutionary perspective, we're not moving very much as a species anymore. Not that exercise is necessarily the missing link, but we really don't move very much.
Right. Yeah. And exercise is, we know now that exercise doesn't really help you lose weight, but it sure helps you be healthy. It sure helps your mood and your your body tone. Yeah. And it's an important part of being a happy person, I think. But exercise is interesting because we're so social. I think that when I talk with my clients about trying to increase exercise who in their lives, I always say, find an exercise buddy, because we're so much better at doing things when we're doing it together. It's more entertaining, and B, you'll just stick to it more because we're very social.
Well, thank you so much for your perspective. It was really interesting and enlightening.
Oh, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. All right. Bye-bye.